Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the YouTube channel grecochess, where we present the various aspects of the game of chess. I'm your host, my name is Harry Lausaniziris, and in this video, I'm going to show to you what happened yesterday night at the second round of the December Swiss tournament that took place at Floral Park, New York, hosted by the Queen's Chess Club. But before we go to the game, first of all, the announcement of the tournament. Let me share my screen. And here we are. What you see on your picture, on your screens, this picture, of course, is not from the chess club itself. The tournament took place at the basement of a church at Floral Park, New York. You see here the announcement. It takes place on 5 consecutive Fridays. December 3rd was round number 1, where I started with a loss. Yesterday night was December 12th, the second round. And there are 3 rounds to go, the 19th, the 26th, and on January 2nd. You see here there are five SS means 5 Swiss rounds, meaning every player is expected to face 5 opponents. There is an exception if you request for a bye. The time control is G90 D5, meaning when the game starts, players have 91 minutes on their clocks, 1.5 hours. And when it's your time to play, for the first 5 seconds, the clock does not move. And then it continues going downwards from where it stopped. Players must complete all their moves before clock shows 0. Otherwise, they are timed out. And they lose by default no matter what the position. Unless the other side has insufficient material, as it's called, meaning they cannot mate no matter what, and then it's a draw. As mentioned, round number 1 started with a loss, so according to the Swiss system, I was expecting an inferior opponent for round 2. And imagine my surprise if my opponent in round 2 turned out to be, believe it or not, I need to minimize the screen a little bit, Edward Frumkin. He has a rating of 2000, you see here. He's a United States National Master, meaning that less than 1% of the chess players have achieved this honor. So he's going to play an extremely skilled player. And look at my number. He has 2000. Look at that. Mine is my rating 1556, 444 points less, which meant that my chances were very limited, to put it mildly. All I was hoping is at least to get a free chess lesson. Analyze the game after that, so what mistake I did and why did I lose. But let's see what actually happened at the chessboard. We are switching now to the screen of the online platform chess.com. We're going to use a system that we usually use. On the left half, you're going to see the position after every move. I have here in my hands the score sheet, and I'm going to copy one by one the moves. And after every move on the left half, you're going to see the position, how it looks like. And on the right half, you are going to see the computer evaluation. The computer is provided by chess.com. It's TOCV16. And if it throws a positive number, it means white is doing better. Negative number means black is doing better. Which move would have been the best? And what are the 5 top options for the player whose turn is to come? And Edward, my opponent, Edward Frumkin, had the white pieces. I had the black. And Edward starts with the English opening, pawn to c4. This is usually the third most popular opening line. Usually the most popular is pawn goes to e4, second one pawn to d4. Other options are, this is called, by the way, the English opening. You see here the name they give it. Other options is knight goes to f3, the Reti opening, or the pawn to g3, preparing for the fianchetto. For the next move, bishop goes to g2. And if you really want to surprise your opponent, you may have knight goes to c3, but if you really want to way surprise your opponent, you may start with pawn to a3. Once I saw that online, and the opponent, the black player, burst in such laughter that the black player ended losing the game because of laughing too much. I'm not sure if that would work. I've never tried it. But Edward starts with pawn goes to c4, and I reply that two responses, either the symmetric pawn to c5 or pawn to e5. I went for pawn going to e5, the standard pawn. Next move for Edward, pawn to g3, preparing to fianchetto, place his bishop on the square g2 and control the long diagonal. My pawn goes to c6 to block it. Yes, you have the long diagonal, but it cannot really attack anything. My pawn at c6 will control d5, and that's it. So instead of placing his bishop on g2, the third move, he decided to go with pawn to d4. What am I supposed to do now? They say that to take is a mistake, and if there is a possibility of exchanges, let your opponent start first. Most of the times it is true, but I felt that this was not one of these most times. Because how could I defend my pawn on e5 that was attacked? Place my pawn on d6, exchange, takes my queen, take the queen, and I cannot castle. Place a bishop on d6, bishop blocks pawn at d7, and bishop at c8 is, and to put it metaphorically, enslaved, cannot get out. What else could I do? The knight cannot go to c6 or d7, pawns are there. To take out the queen early, I don't want to have my queen under attack, because if it ends in e5, knight goes to f3 and takes the queen back. So what to do? This is the exception. Let's take the pawn. And you see here, it is still a book move. It's still okay move. And Edward takes my pawn on d4. And what am I supposed to do now? Continue developing. Knight to f6. It is excellent, says the computer, although it's not a book move. Would prefer my pawn goes to d5, but I was afraid if we started exchanging pawns, either I would be a pawn down, or most likely material would be the same, but I would have a very weak pawn on d5. Knight to c3 for Edward continues developing, and my bishop goes to b4 to pin the knight. So the knight is at c3, can do nothing, cannot move. We finished the first 5 moves. White, Edward is ahead with by 0.47. Usually White is a little ahead after the first 2 moves because they started first. Next move, bishop to g5 for Edward. And I was a little bit concerned here, not a little bit, quite a lot, because knight and queen attack bishop f6. Bishop cannot move because the pin, queen is behind that. And if I allow the exchanges, well, yes, knight is attacked twice, defended twice. I will end up with double pawns, f7, f6, weak, isolated, double pawns. That's not what I wanted. But what can I do to stop it? Definitely, I cannot castle kingside because my king will be exposed on the g file. By the way, facing a player 444 points higher than me, a national master, I felt that my odds were very, very limited. He would try to find the first weakness I would allow him and destroy me. So let's postpone it as much as possible. So very, very reluctantly, I pushed my bishop back to e7, which means basically admitting I had made a mistake when I placed on before. Moving the bishop twice, not a good idea, but I felt less bad than the alternatives. Rook to d1 for Edward. He's not going to castle queenside, but he strengthens his position very much. What can I do now? I was feeling the pressure. Let's see what will happen with the bishop on g5. Let's force the bishop to make a decision. Pose a question, as I say. Computer says the best. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't like it, but the bishop cannot go back to h4, keep the pin. It's not even a pin now, but keep this pressure, because pawn to g5, I win the bishop. It can, of course, take on f6, but then I have the 2 bishops and I attack the queen. Or it can go back. And that's what Edward does. Bishop goes back to f4. And now I feel free to castle kingside without realizing what will happen next. What will happen next is Edward found the combination. He takes my knight on b8, and I felt, why? What is the problem? Well, you see here, however, it's not even among the top 5 moves. Why does he do? Because he moved his bishop 3 times, c1, g5, f4, and now b8. And in exchange, he wins just a knight on b8 that has never moved. And even under equal conditions, bishops are better than knight, let alone when bishop has moved 3 times and the knight is 0. Why would he do such a thing? So when he took my knight on b8, I felt surprised. But what can I do? You see, computer says it's an inaccuracy, but none of us knew it at the game. At the time, I knew that I had only one chance, actually one choice. Take the bishop on b8 with my rook, otherwise I'm down a piece. If I do anything else, bishop goes back and I cannot do anything, I'm down a piece. So I take it and then I got the shock. Queen takes on a7, I'm down a pawn. I barely started the game, I'm just move number 10 and I'm down the pawn. Not only that, my rook on b8 is under attack. If I do nothing, you see the bishop on c8 cannot move, it's blocked by the pawns. So I lose a rook and now I'm not done a piece like before, I'm a complete rook. So I played the only move available and I was glad I had it. I was surprised, I was looking for a move and I was glad at least there was one move that would save me for now. Queen to c7. So we complete the first 10 moves. Computer says it's a great move, but I had no other choice. I really think a move is great if you sacrifice material, and many moves later you see it was a winning move. Not if it immediately is the only move that saves you. But we finished at first 10 moves, and I was feeling so bad and depressed at the time. I was down a pawn. I could never believe that the computer would give me an advantage of 0.22. That is after the first 10 moves. Let's see what happens next. Edward continues developing. Knight goes to f3. My pawn now to d6 to liberate the bishop from c8. At least it has one diagonal to move. Inaccuracy, the computer would rather have my pawn go to d5, but I was afraid to start exchanges. I don't think I would lose a pawn. Of course, Edward would take first. I would take back, he would take, and so on. Or could I? He's attacking it 3 times. Pawn c4, knight c3, rook d1. I'm defending it twice. Pawn c6, knight f6. Yes, I would be down a pawn at the very minimum. That's why I didn't do it. The computer would prefer that. But imagine if the computer, what does the computer say? C takes to d5, and knight takes d5, knight and c, and then rook takes on d5. So it'd be 2 pawns down. And imagine if the computer thinks your best choice is to be 2 pawns down, forget it. That's why my pawn went to d6, and for the time being, I'm only a pawn down. Bishop to g2, move number 12. The move that Edward had planned for move number 3 comes reality at move number 12, 9 moves later. And the bishop at g2 controls a long diagonal from h1 to a8. Yes, the pawn is in the middle, but even under these conditions, although it's not ideal, it's great to have your bishop with this long diagonal. What can I do? My bishop goes to d7. The two rooks can connect with each other. Each rook protects the other. I don't depend on my queen on c7 protecting the rook on b8. And soon my bishop will be more centralized. It's developed already. Kingside castling for Edward. And I was thinking then, okay, I lost a pawn, but if I could win that queen, I'm winning. But how? If I send my rook to a8, my first thought, queen has 2 escape squares, d4 and e3. But what if I put my pawn to c5 first, blocking the escape? This blocks escape, but this gives Edward one more chance to get out of trouble or save his queen. The computer thinks the best move is knight goes either to e1 or to d2, because then if my rook goes to a8 to attack the queen, as would be the best response for black, the queen can take on b7 and be a second pawn up, while my rook cannot take a2 because of the knight. So the computer thought that if the game went ideally, if both players did their very best, I would be 2 pawns down. Oh, thanks, computer. But Edward found the only other move to save his queen. The third option, according to the computer, queen goes to a3. So if the rook attacks it on a8, queen can save itself on b3, then c2, and be out of trouble. So I'm still a pawn down. Not only that, I'm also down computer-wise. And what do I do now? If white bishop is on g2, I'm going to put my bishop on c6 to challenge the control of the long diagonal h1, a8. And Edward will place his knight to e1, not so much for the knight. The knight, if anything, goes to worst square backwards and is between the two rooks, blocks the coordination. But what Edward wanted is his bishop on g2 to have more access, because the knight on f3, it was blocking. It's my turn now, and I was thinking as follows. Usually you don't want the g pawn to be moved in front of your king, to go to g3 for white or g6 for black, because it creates a weakness. But there is a way to cover the weakness if you put the bishop at the vacated square, the g2 or g7. And so long as the bishop is there, the weakness is covered. And that's what I did not want to happen. That's why my bishop on c6, that was doing nothing else other than challenging the one on g2. Let's exchange. Yes, I know that to take as a mistake, don't start the exchanges, but every rule has the exceptions. And this is the second time I was facing this exception. So take it. The computer thinks it's inaccuracy. The computer wants me to start attacking along the H file. But that time I was feeling some relief, because I didn't want to constrain my bishop on c6 just to block the one on g2. And Edward has two ways to take it, the knight or with the king. He was thinking and finally decided, but before he decides, after 15 moves, Edward is ahead by 2.26. His advantage becomes bigger and bigger, and I knew what was going to happen. He's the most experienced. He'll set one trap after another. His advantage will become bigger and bigger and bigger until I fall in one of them, and before I know it, good night. Edward uses his king to take the bishop, the second best choice, as you see here. The top one is the knight, the second one the bishop. So he takes the bishop. Inaccuracy is a computer, but still ahead. My queen now goes to d7. What was my queen dreaming? If I could have any kind of support, check from h3. But how can this happen? My knight would have to go, for example, to g5. If I had my knight on g5, wonderful. And then invade, and especially if the pawns would have moved ahead, it's going to be made. Now, I cannot do it now, but I'm keeping this option for the future if the opportunity comes. The problem is that if this knight on c3 was not there, my knight would go to e4 and then g5. Or maybe I can send my knight to h7 and g5. Let's see if I have this chance. But for now, at least I'm preparing just in case this thing happens. And Edward pushes his pawn to e4. Mistakes as a computer. Of course, when he played it, I didn't consider the mistake. I thought he's expanding, having better control of the center. And I wasn't feeling happy at all. But what can I do? You play what you can. Queen to e6. And then I saw it. Queen to e6. Opportunity is attacking 2 pawns, c4 and e4. You may be wondering, yes, but e4 is protected by the knight. Yes, but then first my knight takes, his knight takes, queen e4 check. So I'm attacking both pawns, c4 and e4, and I didn't see a way that Edward could defend both of them. So if I'm lucky, if things go the way I hope, I'll get back the pawn I was behind. Let's see, will this happen? He finds a move, knight goes, great moves is the computer. Well, at least greater than the queen to c7, I would say, because this really, you needed some imagination to see that you have a double attack. Knight goes to d5. Mistakes as a computer, and now I'm ahead by 0.32, but when Edward played it, I thought at least he's postponing the getting back the pawn. Of course, that's not true. Maybe I could have taken at e4 check and then takes a pawn at c4 maybe, but I didn't like his knight being in my half of the board. And not only that, attacking the idea I had was crazy, because look, queen takes e4 check, black defense, queen takes c4, yes, but then knight takes e7. I didn't like his knight being on d5, attacking my bishop on e7, having my queen on e6, defending the bishop. So let's exchange first. We exchange, and no matter how Edward replies, I win a pawn. He takes with the c pawn as he did, I take the e4. He takes the e pawn, check here at e4 myself, and then I take at e4. In two moves, well, he made it easier for me. He takes with the c pawn, and then my queen takes the pawn on e4. And at this point, I felt great moves as a computer, too obvious. At this time, I felt wonderful. First of all, I got my pawn back. And second, what pawns did we exchange? Edward won the A pawn rook file, and I won the E pawn central file. You may be wondering what's the difference. Central pawns are more powerful, they control the crucial central squares, and in addition, the rook pawns, they only control one square. For example, the A3 pawn controls the B4 square, or the A7 the head controls the B6, only one. But the central one, the E4, controls two squares, D5 and F5. So it's both that it was a more important pawn at the center and has double the range of the rook pawn. So I felt that maybe I'm doing even better a little bit, not too much, a little bit better. But when you face a player 444 points around you, he'll find a way, one way or the other. He'll set the traps, you'll fall in one of them, you'll see most of them, you'll fall in one, and that's it. Let's see what will happen. Knight goes to f3 to cover the check. Now there is a problem. I was thinking to post a pawn to g5, g4, take advantage of the pin, and win the knight. Of course, Edward would find some way to stop it. For example, if pawn went to g4, he would lose the pawn, but he might use the pawn, go to h3 or some other way, but I knew I would weaken his defense like that. I would not win the knight, but weaken his defense. I was thinking about that, but then I saw with Tarot, fortunately I saw it on time. If I do any crazy thing like that, rook goes to e1, attacks the queen. Queen cannot take the rook because both the knight and the rook will take it back. But if queen goes anywhere to safety, I lose my bishop on e7. And I got scared and felt lucky that I found it, even though at the last moment. So I sent my bishop to f6. Wonderful. Now my bishop has a long diagonal, the other one, from a1 to h8. Exerts pressure on the pawn on b2, and the queen on a3 needs to defend this pawn. I felt relief that at least I saw the horror before it happened. And we completed the first 20 moves, and believe it or not, computer thinks I'm ahead by 0.66. At that time, I felt I might be a little bit better, but not enough to overcome somebody that is a National Master 444 points rated higher than me. I would be lucky to escape with a draw. But let's see, let's do the best we can, and let's try to get the most out of this lesson. Rook to e1 as I expected, but this time the queen will move, and there is no bishop to be taken. Where to put my queen? I didn't want my queen to start running from square to square to square, and I felt the best way is exchange it. Queen goes to b4. Mistakes as a computer, and you'll see why. Because yes, queens are exchanged, and to take is a mistake. And while it seems that Edward made this mistake, of course he didn't want his queen to have to run from place to place to place. I felt nice attacking the pawn b2, but look what's happening. Of course, Edward will save it. I have the double pawns b7, b4 isolated. Also, I have isolated d6. And Edward has only one isolated on d5. But his is quite advanced. Let's see. So what happened is that if rook's knight, bishop would suddenly disappear, I would be lost. With the pawn structure I have, I would lose clearly. Not only that, you may wonder, yes, but these pieces are still there. Yes, but this gives an idea to Edward. Start exchanging, and if you can exchange all the big things, then with king and pawns, he's the winner. Let's see what happened. First of all, Edward saves his pawn. Pawn goes to b3, clearly. But, okay, I cannot take the b2, c, can I take the a2? Rook goes to a8. And the pawn cannot be saved by itself. If it goes a3, I take it before. If it goes a4, I take it en passant. But if I go a3, can take I with the pawn with the rook. So can he save it with his rooks? The rook from d1, if it goes to d2 to save it, bishop to c3. If it goes to a1 to save it, my bishop will take the rook. But Edward found the other move. The other move I was hoping not to find, even if though, in fact, not only I didn't even see it, let's be honest, I didn't even see that move. It caught me by surprise when Edward played it. The computer has it only as the fifth best, but it saves the pawn. Rook to e2. But yes, I did not win the pawn. Material is equal now, but at least I'm forcing Edward to use an entire rook just to protect the pawn. What will I do now? My rook goes to a3. I want to double my rooks on the a file and win the a pawn. Can Edward save it? If he places the rook on a1, it's lost by my bishop. That's another advantage of moving my bishop to f6. Both saving the bishop and second controlling an important long diagonal and putting a lot of constraints on the rooks. Can the rook go on d2? Maybe, but I might be able to do later. Better later, put my bishop on c3, rook has to move, for example, go to c2, and little by little he's running out of squares. But Edward decided to do something that the computer would prefer. He puts his knight, he's the third best move of the computer. His best would be a rook, a pawn goes to a4, the second rook to e4 and attack the pawn at b4, then I would put my bishop to c3 to really defend it. Edward decided to place his knight on d4 and blocking my bishop. So my bishop, yes, still is on the nice long diagonal, but its pressure ends at d4. And what do I do now? Let's double the rooks. Okay, the bishop cannot do anything, but at least I have double rooks on the a file. And it seems I'm going to win the pawn at a2. Computer thinks it's inaccuracy. Would rather have my rook go to d8 to protect the d6 pawn. We completed the first 25 moves, and after this inaccuracy, Edward is ahead by 0.44. It goes back and forth until now. Edward once reached something like 2 or 3 points ahead of me, but now we're down to almost even. It goes back and forth. I'm daydreaming of the a2 pawn. How can Edward defend it? Maybe rook can go to d2. If it goes to d2 rook, then bishop takes knight, rook takes knight, and then the pawn is mine. But Edward saw that he could not save the a2 pawn, and since you cannot save it, let's see, can he attack something else? And that's exactly what he does. Knight goes to b5, attacks my rook on a3, I have to move it. Attacks the pawn on d6, not easy to save both. And I decided, let's take the a2 pawn while I can. Quick change. I take the rook, and Edward takes the pawn on d6. Look what's happening. I have isolated pawns b7, b4. Edward has isolated pawn on b3 that basically it's isolated, but at least it plays a role. It blocks my b pawns. And he has the wonderful, it's isolated, but it's a passed pawn on d5. And it seems that it is free to go to d8 to get promoted. If anything, the only thing stopping it is own knight on d6. So he'll have somehow to move the knight and some deal with my bishop. But my bishop on f6, if it promotes, my bishop can take the pawn. But then the rook takes my bishop. So I would have to think what to do. Things were not going nice. Computer says knight taking the pawn was a great move, but I knew in advance this would happen. Then I'm sure that Edward would have seen it. Easy move to find. I thought Edward was much more ahead than the 0.85 at the time. What can I do? In addition to everything else, my pawn on b7 is attacked. Yes, even without that, I'm blocking the b3 pawn, but save it if I can, pawn goes to b6. But I was afraid the pawn was lost. Knight would go to either c4 or c8, attack the pawn, pawn goes to b5, knight goes to d6 again, and pawn is lost. But David decided to do something else. His emphasis was not on winning the b6 pawn, but on helping promote. So he sends his knight to e8. Clearly, yes, my bishop on f6 is attacked but defended by g7 pawn. But if this exchange is done, not only his one exchange near the end, but I have double isolated pawns, f7, f6, h6 is also isolated, and the pawn on d7 will march towards the end, and there's very little to do. I can send my rook to e8, a8, and then d8, but I'll be in a very sad situation where my rook is stuck on d8 just to stop the pawn from promoting. That is why I did not allow this scenario to become a reality, and I send my bishop to d8. It protects the pawn on b6. And Edward thought, okay, b6, I cannot take it for now. Can I take b4? Rook goes to d4. I knew that to save b4 was not easy at all. If I sent my rook on a4, of course, pawn b3 will take it. If I send my bishop on e7, I can defend it for now, but then b6 is hanging. But what if I danger level, if I attack something more important than a pawn? What if I attack the knight, king to f8? Attack the knight, the computer says the best, means that Edward needs to move the knight. If he loses the knight, it will be quite simple for me to find a way to stop the pawn on d5, and then have my material advantage, an extra piece, and win the game. At this point, we completed the first 30 moves, as you see, and the game is very, very close. Edward is leading by just 0.01. See what's going to happen. Knight goes to d6, the best move, says the computer. In fact, the only move that would save the knight. Since at the edge, it had only 4 squares to go, but c7, g7, and f6, 3 out of 4, knight would be lost. It goes the only square that it will be safe. My bishop goes to e7, attack against the knight, so Edward needs to use one more move to save the knight. He cannot afford to lose the knight. Unless, of course, it's an even exchange, then it's great for him. And he decides to send the knight at e4. Why? Because now the pawn on d5 can go to d6, my bishop cannot stop it, will be lost, and then can go to d7, and then I have to, it's one square for promotion, and I have to use all of my pieces to block it, and Edward will use his pieces to take the rest of my material. So what do I do here? My bishop goes to c5. The pawn cannot be pushed because, well, it can be pushed, and I cannot take it, but I can take the rook then, and if I take the rook, the pawn with the assistance of the knight will not be able to make it because I have an extra rook. And of course, Edward is not going to allow it. What does he do? He was thinking, and he played the 5th best possible move. And you're going to see what's the problem with the move. The good thing with the move is that he's one exchange near a wonderful ending, but it's only wonderful because he has a better pawn structure than mine. What I'm not sure if he noticed or not is that the moment we did the exchange, he started first, and of course I continued. Look what happens. My pawn structure is not so terrible any longer. Instead of having the isolated b6 and b4 pawns, I have two connected pawns, c5, b4. I attack the rook, so Edward must use a move to protect the rook. It's still behind the d5 pawn, but now I was hoping I would be able to win the d5 pawn, and if I win it, then the pawns on the pawn from c5 goes to c4. It's taken by b3, but then my b3 pawn, my pawn at b4 goes to b3, 2 squares from promotion, and my rook nearby would help. That's what I was hoping for, but no guarantee it would become a reality. And I was almost sure that Edward had a sleeve, had an ace under his sleeve, as they say metaphorically. Let's see how game continues. Edward tries to win my pawn at c5 and save his rook. He has to save his rook. And where could he put it? c3 or c1, the only safe squares. So he puts it on c4, and I don't want to lose my pawn on c5 because it protects my b4 pawn. So rook goes to a5. And now the race will start. I was expecting now a race, the two kings trying to approach the d5 pawn. How I was planning it would go. King to f3, king to e7, king to e4, kings to d6, and yes, I would not be able to win the pawn d5. The Edward's king would just make it on time, but it would be a lot of pressure. My king would protect the c5 pawn, so my rook would be free to go and perhaps capture pawns elsewhere, I was hoping. But let's see what happened. Move 35, now king goes to f3. You're going to see here that until now I had a small advantage of 0.42. The moment the king goes to f3, that the computer says a mistake, and my advantage suddenly becomes 2.46. When the game was played, I did not expect it. I did not notice, because Edward just did the first move I would have done in his place. What the computer found later is a better move would be rook goes to e4. Why? Exactly, rook goes to e4, because this blocks my king. My king can never, ever, ever make it to d5. Edward had only one chance. My king goes to e7. Now, if Edward does it, it's a check. My king goes to d6, and I win the pawn. But none of us noticed at the time the missed opportunity for Evan. And the computer felt the game was even only because Edward had that result. From the moment that he missed it, I would be ahead. But let's see what will happen. King goes to e4. King to d6, as I was expecting. Rook to c2. Why? The problem for Edward now is if I place my rook on a2, either I win the f2 pawn, meaning, of course, if Edward did not play rook to c2, either, or if king went to f3 to protect it, I win the d5 pawn. And Edward prevents everything by sending his rook to c2. Okay, I cannot take the f2 pawn. Can I take the b3? Rook goes to a3, attacks it, and his rook goes to b2. The only square he could go, but I felt that Edward was stretched to the limit. He needed his king to protect the d5 pawn, and had nowhere else to go. He had to stay at e4. His rook would only go between b1, and in fact it would not even go to b1, because then I go to a2 and I win the f2 pawn. His rook had to get stuck at b2 to guard the pawn at a3. Any chance I could force a Zugzwang, meaning currently at least he can play his pawns. Any way that I could force him to play his pawns to the limit and then either lose the pawns or lose, meaning the FGH pawns, or lose pawns here. Let's see what will happen. My rook goes to a1. Can I attack from the back? Computer says the best. I was not sure it was the best at the time. His rook goes to d2. Because he was afraid I send my rook to d1 and grab the pawn, because if he allowed me to send it to d1, the d5 pawn is lost. What could his rook do? He could not go to d2, I would grab the rook. And I'll go to b1 to win the b3 pawn. So I'm oscillating from winning one pawn to the other, but for the time being, I have not won any pawn. Both of us have 5 pawns. Pawn structure. Edward has the huge advantage of a passed pawn on d5, even though it's blocked by my king on d6. If he can exploit it, it will be great. Meaning if he could put his rook somehow on c6. But I have 2 pawn islands, as they are called. b4, c5 is one of them, f7, g7, h6 is the other. Edward has 3 pawn islands, b3, d5, d3 is one, d5 is the second, and f2, g3, h2 is the third. And in the ending, if basically you're left mostly with pawns, the fewer islands you have, the better. At this point, if we could exchange the rooks, I have to be careful, because my king would need to be stuck at d6 to stop the d5 pawn from being promoted. Not so simple. But let's see how game continues. And rook goes to d3 for Edward. What he wants to do is he wants to protect the b3 pawn that was under attack. And what do? I was thinking what to do, what combination, go to h2, but the pawn goes to h4. Go to f2, go to h1, pawn goes to h4 from h2. Go to f1, pawn goes to f4. I didn't see any way out. Attack the pawn here, I can't. This pawn here, no. I was thinking even to push my pawn to f5 check. But then I still, the rook protects the pawn. I lose the pawn on f7, and the f-pawn, the pawn here is still protected. But finally, I found the move that the computer suggests as the best. Rook to h1 check. No matter where the king goes, my rook will go to d5 and I win the pawn. But Edward had another choice other than moving his king. He can block the check with his rook. I was afraid he would do it, and not so difficult to find it. And that's exactly what he did. Rook to e3. Under different conditions, I could exchange rooks, and if he would take back with his king, I win the pawn on d5. But then I saw that he can take my rook not to the king, but to the pawn on f2. And then the king would stay near d5, so I could not win the pawn like that. Computer says push the pawn to f5, and I was thinking of that. Yes, if I did this, I would win the d5 pawn, but I would lose the f5, and then king would go to g6, and before I know it, the g and the h pawns are lost. And his fg8 could become very strong. I'm not sure if they become stronger than my pawn going to c4, exchange, and then b3, but I didn't want to gamble on that. And that's why I moved my rook to d1. Computer says the third best. The computer would rather have me exchange, but the computer thinks I have exchanged, the king would take back on e3. Why the king and not the pawn? I have no idea. Because if I was white, if black took my rook, I would take back with the pawn and not with the king. But we completed 40 moves, and let's see what does the computer say. Every 5 moves, I'm summarizing the computer valuation. Computer thinks I'm ahead by 4.98. That is important. If I knew it at the game, I would be very encouraged and very optimistic. But in reality, I was scared. I was feeling my position is improving. I feel I had good chances, but I felt I'm facing a national master 444 points higher than me. He'll definitely find some way that I have no idea what it is and win the game when I least expect it. In addition, he had an enormous time advantage. He would spend about half the time I was spending. I didn't mark how much, what times we were at what point, but I knew that he had way more time than mine. I was using my time to the limit because I didn't, if I lost, I didn't want to feel that I lost because I didn't spend enough time. I want to feel that I gave all of it. So, 40 moves were completed. This is the 41st of, if anything, of Edward. And really, I need to tell you because after every 5 moves, after 40th move of black, now my advantage is 3.33, and only after the 41st of white, I'm up to 498. Both of them are very important. And now I decide, let's go to the D1, and I'm attacking there. D5. Computer thinks a miss, but I'm attacking on d5, and there's nowhere that Edward can stop it. If he puts his rook on d3, we exchange rooks, and then I win the pawn on d5. So Edward was thinking, okay, d5, forget it, but let's see what else can we do. Go to f3 and attack the f7 pawn. Not only that, if I took d5, he takes f7, attacks g7. If I move it, he will go to f6, and really he might be able to take these 3 pawns here, at least 2 of them, fg8, king side, and have very good counterplay. And I'm not going to allow it. As I say, delayed gratification. Yes, the pawn on d5 is very tasty, but let's delay its consumption by sending the pawn to f6. Now he cannot take the f-pawn. But he decides, let's go for it. I cannot take it immediately. He says the d5 is lost. I'm not sure what would happen if he put his rook on e5, I check from d4, and no matter where his king goes, I win the pawn at d5. So he feels that d5 is lost. Can we do counterplay on king side? The king goes to f5 and is ready to storm and win my pawns. What do I do? Now we can grab the pawn. And let's see what will happen. I was optimistic. I was ahead, time-wise, not time-wise the clock I mean, but as far as pawn exchanges and grabbing is going place, because he would need to grab these three pawns and start posting them by myself. All I needed to do, if I could, is pawn c4, lost b3, b2, b1. All I needed to do is make sure that at b3 my pawn would be protected one with the other. I felt I was ahead in that, so let's just take the pawn on d5. Computer thinks a mistake, so my advantage becomes less than a third of what was it before. Like my rook to go to c1. But I take it with a check, and of course, check is exactly what Edward wanted, because he was going to send his king to g6 either way or other, and I cannot protect g7. So now time is of the essence. He has a long race in front of him, but if I'm not fast enough, he may end it first. So what do I do? First of all, I find a way that my g7 pawn is not really lost, but there was only one move to stop it. Rook goes to g5 check. Whether he goes to f2 or h2, his only legal moves, he cannot grab g7. And also g7 protects f6 and h6. Which means that he has to make another plan to grab these pawns if he wants to have counterplay there. Of course, this means that I cannot start pushing my b and c pawns, but I stop counterplay. His king goes to f7 and is waiting for the opportunity, waiting for my king to move, then he can grab one pawn after another. And if my king rook does not move, it will not help with the pushing the b and c pawns. Now I saw time was of the essence. Forget about here. Whatever happens, happens. Que sera, sera. As I say, my king goes to d5 and ready to attack the b3 pawn. If the b3 pawn disappears, inaccuracy is a computer, but I wanted my king to be as near the b3 pawn as possible. I'm not sure what difference would that make. But at this point, we completed the first 45 moves. Computer says I'm ahead, but only by 0.56. So the advantage I had at some point was almost 5 points. Now it's about a half. But let's see what will happen. Rook goes to f4. So what Edward is trying to do is to stop my king from reaching the b3 pawn. Cannot go from the other side because it cannot pass through a4. So my king is blocked. Maybe that's why the computer thought that if I was better, his rook could not go to f4. And then since I didn't see the time, I didn't feel I had a missed opportunity. But what can I do? Let's try to attack along the h file. Pawn goes to h5. And Edward stops me with inaccuracies in the computer. Would rather have me attack the rook. And he sends his pawn to h4 to stop my pawn at h5. Great moves as a computer, and at this point we're exactly even. And then I'm feeling that if we exchange rooks, yes, he could grab my 3 pawns with the king, 1, 2, 3, 4 moves, and then maybe he doesn't even need to grab, he can start pushing this, but I'm way ahead in winning these pawns. So can we exchange rooks? My rook goes to g4. Not only that, if we exchange rooks, my pawn at g4 is blocking the f pawn. So, but I started counting. If we exchange rooks, and as it's going to happen, yes, I would win the b3 pawn and my c4 would promote, but the h4 was very powerful and could promote. And in all the calculation I was doing, we would promote simultaneously, but at least I would be half of a move one play ahead. I was doing all this, spending a lot of time on all that. Edward, perhaps he was doing the calculations, but they came very easy to him because he played much faster than me. And Edward Said, okay, you want to exchange rooks? Let's go and exchange. And now Edward, as expected, takes the g7 pawn. And I start pushing. Pawn goes to c4. And unfortunately, of course, he takes back, I expect. Unfortunately, comes with a check. And I don't care about the check. I care it's a waste one move. If my king was anywhere, I could immediately push the pawn. But first, I need to grab the pawn. And Edward doesn't waste any time winning the f6 pawn because you see that he's 4 moves from promoting and 3 moves. He cannot afford to waste any moves. He needs to keep my pawn on f6 alive if he wants to promote with me simultaneously. And that's what we do. The next moves went very fast because they're too obvious. Great moves is the computer, but in a pawn race, you don't have too much of a choice. Computer can give all the great moves exclamation marks that it wants, but I don't care. These moves don't deserve exclamation marks. They are too obvious. I promote first b1, but without a check. And now Edward promotes. But let's go back after 50 moves. What was happening? After 50 moves, game was completely even. And now the game is still completely even. At that point, I felt I have an advantage. I felt that I could much easier win the pawns than Edward win the pawns. So I felt I had a small advantage of winning. I felt at least it was 2 results, either a win or a draw. Assuming, of course, I wouldn't make any mistakes, and I wasn't so sure about that at all. I was almost sure that Edward will find some tactics where they don't exist out of nowhere and win the game eventually. But at least I would be proud that I had fought a good fight. My queen goes to b7 with a check now. It's me who promoted first, even though only by half a move. So I'd better be in control and check. b7. And you maybe wonder, how about the pawn on f6? Can't Edward grab it? I would hope so, because then queen goes to b2 and x-ray, goodbye white queen, I won the game. If king would go to the h, for example, to h6, queen goes to h1, we exchange queens, and my king is near the pawns, and I win the game. And Edward played the only move that could keep him in the game. I didn't know at the time, but any move other than what he did, king to g6, has an m in front of it, meaning I would mate. Maybe I would need 22 moves, but it was mine to win. It was mine to win. I was almost ready to say wine to me. So king goes to g6. And what can I do? I knew I should not allow him to start checking because he'll find a trick to win. My queen goes to d4, another check, and once again he cannot take the f6 pawn. We finish 55 moves and the score is 0.00, perfect equality. I was also afraid that if he took the pawn on f6, if I gave him the chance to take the pawn on f6, and we exchange queens on f6, then king is a little bit nearer than mine, barely nearer, but just enough to win. How can I stop it? First of all, Edward will put his king to f7. I knew I had a repetition, threefold repetition. If I wanted, I had a draw in my pocket. My queen goes to b7 again, check. Yep. King now goes to e6. Edward doesn't want repetition. Now I can check him more than one way. My queen can go to c6, to d5, to e4, and even check from a6 or b6. And I would have to think of each one of these possibilities. And my time was becoming less and less and less. I was near the 10-minute mark, and Edward had more than half an hour. So I knew that Edward having more time, he could much easier find the great move that he needs than me. For me, much easier to make a mistake was not excited optimistic at all. But at least I knew with perfect play, I couldn't lose it. Queen goes to c6, check. King goes to f5. Now the story is that the king cannot take f6, because if he could take it, my queen cannot go to this diagonal and he win his queen by x-ray. And for one moment I was scared, but then I realized but his king cannot legally take the pawn on f6. King goes to f5. Queen goes to f3 check now. And I'm going to win the f2 pawn. I was hoping king goes to e6. Inaccuracy, the computer gives me once again the advantage. King should have gone to g6. No idea why, because now I can take the pawn on f2, but he can take the pawn on f6. And if we exchange queens, I was counting that his king is near to my pawn than my king to his pawn. And he'll take it first, even though barely, but just enough. We said his king goes to e6. And my queen will grab the pawn. Let's grab it while we can. And what does he do for move 60? I was expecting he would take my pawn at f6. The computer wants his queen to go to g8 and threaten a discover check. I'm not sure how good that would be, but that was not what I was expecting. I was expecting he takes my pawn, and I cannot exchange pawns because his king is near to my pawn, because his king is a little bit to the right of mine. Mine is in c file, he's in f file, and in my calculations, his king could block my king and would win my pawn. I would have to think some other way to check if his queen took my pawn. So what does he do? His queen goes to c8 with a check. He wants to take the initiative with the checks. And my king goes to d4. So now I want to have my king as near the g3 pawn as possible. So if queens are exchanged, I will have a better chance. At this point, he offered me a draw. And believe it, to have a United States chess national master offering you a draw is something extremely, extremely rare. It would be a great opportunity for me to have a wonderful result, but I was so much in the spirit, I said, nope, like this, exactly, nope. I just shook my head. So my king goes to d4. Now, you may think king queen now on the same diagonal, and I had to double check it many times to make sure he couldn't take advantage. Because what could he do? If his queen went to c5, I take the queen. If the chessboard had one more square, his queen could go to the z8 square, I'm not sure how else to call it, and I would lose my queen. But fortunately, the chessboard is only 8 by 8 and not 9 by 9. And after double check many times in my limited time to make sure that no surprise can come like that, I agreed to have, I allowed my king to go to d4. We finished 60 moves, 0.49 advance for me. I refused to draw even though I had no idea that I was ahead. I knew that it was just one tiny inaccuracy and I would lose the game. And with the limited time and with my rating 444 points lower than his, I would most likely make it. His queen goes to c7 now. Try to protect the pawn on g3. Of course, if I was too tired and I said free pawn, take it without looking at the queen, I would lose my queen and good night immediately. Instead, my queen goes to f3. Good thing is that my queen is protected. What does this mean? Even if he has an x-ray to win my queen, the pawn on g4 will take his queen on f3 and promotes. Let's see what happened. His queen goes to b6 check. My king goes to d3. I didn't want it to be too near his king to have some opportunities there. His queen goes to b3 check. My king goes to inaccuracy, says the computer, gives me a head 166. King goes to e2. I want to be as near the g3 pawn as possible. If he exchanges queens, I grab the pawn. He'll grab, of course, the f6, but my b4 pawn promotes. And that's why he does not exchange queens. He sends his queen to c2 check. My king goes to f1. I'm not sure. Great moves. The computer didn't feel great because my king is constrained on the first. Krag cannot move to the second and grab the pawn. But I was feeling, look, I have an extra pawn. Even if it's lost, it will cost him a move. The other two remaining, mine is near the promotion than his. So things started looking good for me. His queen goes to f5. Mistakes as a computer puts me ahead by 585. And then I started seeing what would happen if I exchange the queens. If I exchange the queens, my king would go. He would take my pawn and would eventually win the game because my pawn on f6 is he wouldn't exchange. I go here. He doesn't take my pawn on f6. He takes my pawn on g4, and his pawn on g3 will eventually promote. And my pawn on f6 can do nothing. That's why instead of first promoting, which would have been a huge mistake. You see, it's not even among the top 5 moves. The 5 moves are moving your king, and I played the third best move, even though all 3 top are 618. I'm not sure what was the tie breaking to place him in this order. My king goes to g2. We completed the first 65 moves, and I have an advantage of 5.42. And now I'm ready for the queen exchange. Now that my king is near and will grab his pawn. Next move, 66, he takes my pawn on f6. So materially we're equal. But then I counted again and again and again and again. By the way, now we are in the 5-minute limit, but this game was so important. I was continuing recording the moves, even though I didn't have to record them. I was between 4 and 5 minutes. I continued keeping them because I was feeling I'm ready for a historic win, and I don't want to have the game interrupted and telling the viewers, sorry, 5 minutes, we stopped recording, but I won in the end. I wanted to keep all the moves. So I take the queen on f5. He takes the queen on f5. And I win the pawn. You see here, the computer says m13. If I play correctly, in 13 moves, I'm mating. There's no way I can lose here, clearly. But win is very easy. Next move, no matter what he did, my king would go either f3 or h3. If his king didn't go to e4, I would place my king on f3. If his king went here, my king would go to h3. Or maybe even h2, yes, and then little by little push my pawn to promotion. At this time, we were playing for 2 hours and 3/4, almost 3 hours. All games have been concluded, and the few remaining people, including Jay Kleinman, the tournament director, he was watching at RJ. And at this point, believe it or not, and the United States Chess National Master Edward Frumkin shook my hand and resigned. And this was my greatest ever chess win. I couldn't believe it. You may remember the previous video, I had a draw, but this was online with Blitz game with the National Master Nilson Lopez in his Chess Vibes YouTube channel, and I felt so proud of that. But imagine this is not just a draw, it is a win. So I won, I defeated Edward Frumkin, but of course, I'm smiling, but of course, Edward played a very good game. He really played very well, and some little points here and there decided the game, and especially when he didn't find the rook to e4 at some point. Which move was it? It was move 35. Yes, move 35 was the crucial one. And then in the end, there were some moves with the queens. The endings with queens and pawns, especially when two sides promote simultaneously, and we're talking about queen checks, are very, very tricky. Because a queen in an open board can go to up to at most 27 squares. And imagine you have to think all these possibilities, all kind of X-rays lurking when you least expect them. You have 27 possible moves of the queen plus the moves of the king or the pawns. The opponent has a similar way of thinking, and they don't go according to general principles. You have to be specific. In these earnings, you don't have white is ahead by a little bit or black ahead by a little bit, but you have either white is winning or black is winning or is a draw. So it was a very difficult one for me, especially with so little time remaining. Edward had about half an hour remaining out of the 1.5 hour. But really, Edward played extremely well. I would need to congratulate him for giving this great fight. Jake Kleinman, after the game, he came and congratulated me for the win. He couldn't believe it. And then at the next room at the Skittles, so where players were relaxing, I found Jay Bonin, and he also congratulated me. Having an international master congratulating me for a win above the national master was something I never expected to happen. But let's keep it down, look at the review. What does the computer think about the game? And the computer has no idea who was playing what. It only knew white is the one side, the black is the other. You see here, until a point, it was back and forth. White is ahead, black a little white, a little black more. White comes back, and only in the end, black wins the game. Accuracy, 85.7 for me, 89, for 85.7 for Edwards, 89.5 for me. And we played as if Edward's rating was 2300, 300 points above his real one, and mine 2400, 850 points, more than 50% above my real rating. Well, I know the computer is flattering, as I have mentioned, and I don't need this flattery, but really, even if you take away the flattery, it was a great performance. What did we do? No brilliant moves. Great moves, 5 for me, 3 for Edward, but most of them were the pawn races, and I wouldn't count them as great. And even the others, I doubt they were great. Best, 34 for Edward, 31 for me. Excellent, 5 for Edward, 5 for me. Good, 9 for... Wait a minute, let's see again. Great, 5 for me, 3 for Edward. Best, 34 for me, 31 for Edward. Excellent, 5 each. Good, 9 for me, 8 for Edward. Book 4 for Edward, 3 for me. And now in the, let's not call them negatives. What else can we use? Things to be considered. Let's call it this way. 10 inaccuracies for Edward and 4 for me. Mistakes, 6 for me, 5 for Edward. 1 miss for me and 1 blunder for Edward. And I need to say I was lucky. I did my best, but I was lucky, and I really spent almost all my time. When the game ended, I had between 3 and 4 minutes remaining because I wanted, if I lost, at least to feel that I had given it all, have given all of my time. Edward had spent 1 hour out of his 1.5. And after 2 rounds, I have 1 win and 1 loss. In the meantime, let's keep a look at what's happening at the tournaments. grecochess. We have 2 points for Barack 7 after my skin resigned in this game. The other games continue. And the all pairing, this is the only pairing that is there. And let's see what's happening. This is the final round. These are the 4 finalists vying for the first place. And let's see what's happening at the other tournament. The Underwater Moonlight, the 9 Moons tournament. That is near the end of the first round. In my group, you see that everything is between Moss 404 and Google Ship Original. The first 2 players have advanced, but we'll see that later. Let's see how things are going in all the groups. Group 1, Lotus Time Chess from Japan and Oli Kimbo from Australia have advanced with Canon 1972 having 3 games to go, and if he gets 1.5 points, he overcomes Marco 1409 and passes. Otherwise, if he gets 0.5, Marco 409 is passing. 1 point, we'll have to look at tiebreaking. Group 2. Spider 99 from Egypt and Luciano Cojan from Argentina have advanced already. And for the third place, it is between Jean Lei 123 from China, One Word from, I think this is England. Yes, this is England, not to be confused with Great Britain that has another flag, and Great Britain encompasses England, Scotland, Wales, and North Ireland. And a small chance for Abdul Basit Khwarizada from Afghanistan. If he wins enough of his last games, he might be able to advance. Group 3, where the organizer of the tournament, Zanilo from Italy, has a chance to advance. We already know Maxim Govorokha. The finalist in grecochess is also at least a semi-finalist in the Moonlight Tournament, and so is Vian Karvanans from Malaysia. And the third place is going to be a tough one, will depend on the tie-breaking between Silvio 888 from Croatia, the host and subscriber of my channel Zanilo from Italy, and RMV 9827 from Mexico have 10 points, and Ray Duquel from United States, if he wins his last 3 games, reaches 10 points, is going to be depend on tie breaking. Group 4, Iraq Lion from Iraq, 14 out of 14. It's also Maxim Govoruka, 13 out of 13. These two are the perfect ones, have advanced. Rishi Raj 3 from India has advanced. And there's going to be a fight for the third place between quite a few players. Vivaladivya from India, Aaron Aitmea from Mexico, and Hisak the King from Italy have some chances. Group 5 finished. Chinanfu, Greenland, Amamti from Indonesia, Pian Perez from Palestine. Group 6, Mathis B 2008 from France, David 8x8x8x8 from Brazil, and Muncha 44 from Croatia have advanced, so games have been completed. Group 7, I also completed. Mebius from Nigeria, Jenard F from Uzbekistan, and Tragis from Brazil have advanced. So 3 out of 9 groups have completed. Group 8, my group, Khaled Katab from Egypt and Eliezer MSTL from Cuba have advanced. The third place is between Gugusup Original from European Union and March 404 from Kenya. Depends on the last games of March 404. Alto Temni from Netherlands, I don't believe they have a chance because of the tie-breaking situation. And Group 9, the last one. Here, many games to be played. Nothing is known. Nobody is guaranteed to advance, with Joy Jake from South Korea being ahead. That's it for now. Of course, I believe you all realize how excited I am with my biggest ever chess success yesterday night. First time ever I won against a 2000 rated player and also United States chess master. Let's see what is going to happen ahead. But ladies and gentlemen, my dear viewers, thanks for watching. Thanks to the subscribers. If you cannot subscribe yet, please consider doing so. Thanks to the likes, and thanks to the encouraging comments I receive from time to time. I am Harry Lassaniziris. This is the Greco Chess YouTube channel. Goodbye.